Marked as a witch and abandoned to the unforgiving grip of winter, her gaunt figure lingers in the desolate farmhouse like a specter long gone, until calloused hands, once strong enough to fell great oaks, bring forth an unforeseen rescue. As rumors of her sinister abilities spread to those seeking revenge, what dreadful cost will be incurred when a solitary lumberjack chooses to protect the woman shunned by all? Valora Finch's stomach ached intensely, leaving her unable to stand upright any longer. 3 days without sustenance would affect anyone in that way. Once, she had been the most formidable healer in Belwick County. Her slender fingers, chilled to a deep blue, struggled with the latch on the barn door as the December wind hurled snow at her face like a flurry of sharp daggers. Though the interior offered little in terms of warmth, it provided a refuge from the relentless wind outside. A mouse darted across the decayed floorboards, vanishing into a crevice.
"Even you flee from me now,"
Valora murmured, her voice trembling from neglect. She felt a pang of jealousy towards the tiny creature. At the very least, it found a refuge, a sanctuary to retreat to. Only a month ago, this barn was filled with ample provisions to sustain her and James throughout the winter. Sacks of flour, potatoes, dried meat, and preserves harvested from their summer garden. Now the shelves lay bare, their contents taken by the very neighbors who had once lauded her healing abilities during their children's fevers, or their wives' struggles in childbirth. Valora hobbled to the tiny window, clearing the frost from the glass with her sleeve. The farmhouse loomed ominously in the dimming twilight, its chimney silent, devoid of any smoke. There was no sense in burning the last remnants of firewood when the chill had seeped so thoroughly into her bones that she could no longer recall the feeling of warmth. The recollection surged forth with haunting precision. Pastor Levi stood at her door, his usually gentle expression contorted with revulsion as he pointed at the small red birthmark just visible beneath her collarbone, peeking out from her dress. He referred to it as the devil's kiss, following the tragic deaths of 3 children in town from fever, despite Valora's frantic attempts to rescue them with her herbal remedies. "But I've carried this mark since the day I was born," she insisted. "You've witnessed it countless times." The pastor's gaze had sharpened. "The devil claims his own from the start, Mrs. Finch. He demonstrates a remarkable level of patience." Behind him, the expressions of her neighbors, faces she'd recognized throughout her life, grew rigid with fear and animosity. They stripped away everything: food, firewood, James's tools, and even her cherished book of healing recipes that had belonged to her grandmother. James had made an effort to stand up for her. Her kind, soft-hearted husband, who had never harmed a single soul, stood resolutely at their door with his shotgun, demanding that the crowd leave his wife in peace. They struck him relentlessly until he could no longer remain upright, then pulled them both to the town square. The decision was straightforward: depart from Belwick for all time or face the flames like the sorceress they thought her to be. Under the cover of darkness they escaped, taking only the garments they wore and the scant provisions they could manage to hold. James's face was so swollen from the beating that his vision of the road ahead was nearly obscured. Yet he grasped her hand, vowing they would begin anew in a different place. Yet James never witnessed that fresh start. The biting chill, gnawing hunger, and his wounds became insurmountable. 2 weeks into their exile, as they gathered in this forsaken farm 10 miles from Belwick, his breathing became shallow. By morning, Valora found herself alone, her tears crystallizing on her cheeks as she laid her husband's face to rest beneath his tattered coat, helpless to carve out a proper grave in the hard, frozen earth. Now, 32 days since they had departed from Belwick, she had marked each day on the barn wall with a rusty nail. Valora pondered whether death could be a more merciful option than this unrelenting hunger and chill. Her dress draped from her once strong figure like a mere sack, and her fingers, once deft enough to mend the smallest of wounds, now curled helplessly against the chill. She fell to her knees in the damp hay, grasping her grandmother's silver pendant, the sole treasure she had succeeded in concealing when they arrived. If she exchanged it in the next town, she could possibly gather enough provisions for a week, yet the closest settlement lay 15 miles distant. In her frail condition, she would never survive the snowdrifts. Outside, the wind screamed like a creature in pain. Within, Valora's stomach responded with a painful lament. She had not shed a tear since laying James to rest, yet now tears threatened to spill from her eyes. What had she done to warrant such animosity? Is there really such a thing as abandonment? The barn door swung wide, unleashing a torrent of snow and wind into the space. Valora hurriedly retreated, her heart pounding fiercely within her chest. Had they returned to complete their unfinished business? To haul the sorceress back to Belwick for a fitting execution? A colossal silhouette loomed in the entrance. Not the gang she dreaded, but something equally horrifying. A colossal figure, devoid of features, looms in the fading glow. "Who goes there?" called for a voice that was deep and rugged, akin to the texture of tree bark. "This area is designated as private property." Valora pressed herself against the back wall, contemplating whether starvation would have been a more merciful fate than whatever this giant might inflict upon a solitary woman. And yet, what else could she possibly forfeit? "Please," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the howling wind. "I find myself without any other options." The silhouette entered the barn, firmly shutting the door against the raging storm outside. As her eyes adapted to the shadows, Valora noticed he bore an axe slung over one shoulder, its blade shimmering faintly in the low light. His beard was lush and deep, his eyes concealed under a pronounced brow. Snowflakes dissolved in his hair while he observed her, his expression a mystery she couldn't decipher. He finally said, "You're from Belwick." This is a statement of fact, not a question. The mention of her previous residence caused Valora to recoil. Not any longer. The man's eyes roamed across her slender figure, noting her sunken cheeks and worn-out dress. A subtle change flickered across his features. Not sympathy precisely, but acknowledgement. "When was the last time you had a meal?" he inquired, placing his axe on the ground. Valora found herself unable to recall. The days merged into a fog of chill and emptiness. "Is it significant?" she inquired. The mysterious figure delved into his coat, retrieving a compact parcel swathed in fabric. The scent reached her senses long before her eyes could comprehend its contents. Warm bread accompanied by a slice of firm cheese. Her stomach twisted in agony, and she struggled to suppress the instinct to pounce on it like a wild creature. The man spoke in a rough tone, as if he could sense her unspoken concerns about payment. "Consume!" Valora's hand quivered as she extended it toward the food. "What makes you want to assist me?" The stranger's gaze locked onto hers, a shade of blue reminiscent of river ice yet imbued with a warmth forged from the memory of my mother being burned at the stake when I was just 10. For cultivating plants, they lacked comprehension. Years of pride crumbled as Valora ripped into the bread, tears flowing down her cheeks. The figure stood quietly, his imposing silhouette shielding the room from the chill seeping in through the doorway. Once she completed her thoughts, he began to speak once more. "My cabin is located 3 miles to the north. It may be modest, yet there's a warmth and an abundance of sustenance." After a moment of uncertainty, he finally said, "My name is Mason Blackwood." The name held no significance for her, and yet it encompassed everything. A soul who recognized her humanity when her own kind had branded her a beast. A person who extended a hand when others had chosen to walk away. "I'm Valora," she murmured, her voice more resolute now. "Valora Finch." Mason gave a brief nod, then extended a hand marked by the wear of hard work. "Can you walk, Valora Finch, or shall I have to bear your weight?" In that instant, confronted by the unfamiliar figure extending his bread with a rough yet genuine warmth, Valora sensed a flicker of emotion deep within her chest. Something she believed had perished along with James. Not hope, she hesitated to call it that, but maybe its specter lingered. As the blizzard howled beyond the walls, she found herself lost in thought. What twist of fate had brought this lumberjack to her on this particular night? And what sacrifice would she ultimately make for his kindness? As Valora stepped into Mason Blackwood's cabin, she felt her breath catch in her throat. Not due to its grandeur, for it lacked that, but because the warmth enveloped her like a comforting hug after enduring weeks of chilling cold that penetrated to her very bones. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, sending flickering shadows across the rugged walls. The cramped area was infused with the scent of pine, smoke, and a simmering concoction in a pot that stirred her empty stomach with a sharp pang of longing. Sit, Mason commanded, gesturing toward a chair by the fire. When Valora paused, he gently urged, "Please." She felt her legs almost give way as she settled onto the wooden seat. The heat of the flames caused her skin to tingle sharply as sensation flowed back into her numbed limbs. She was unaware of how near she had come to death until this very moment, when its hold started to fade. Mason navigated the cabin with an unexpected elegance for someone of his considerable size. He carefully poured the hot broth into a rustic wooden bowl, setting it down on the table next to her along with a hearty piece of dark bread. "Gently," he cautioned as she extended her hand. "Your stomach will protest if you hurry." Valora compelled herself to take tiny sips, even as every instinct urged her to swallow it whole. The broth consisted of straightforward venison and wild onions, accompanied by a handful of winter herbs, yet it felt like a banquet worthy of royalty. "What motivates you to assist me?" she inquired with deliberate spoonfuls. Mason positioned himself opposite her, his imposing stature rendering the chair almost diminutive. The glow of the flames danced in his beard, transforming the deep hues into shimmering copper. He remained silent for an extended period. "Because no one helped us," he finally said, his deep voice barely rising above a whisper. As they approached my mother, Valora paused, the spoon froze in midair just before reaching her lips. "You mentioned they burned her," Valora said. Mason nodded, his blue eyes focused on a distant point beyond the cabin walls, perceiving something that eluded Valora's sight. She nurtured plants for their healing properties, and when the mayor's son succumbed to fever, they'll Henried her a witch. I lacked the strength to intervene. The similarities to her own narrative lingered in the air, silent, yet undeniable. "What about your father?" Valora inquired, placing her spoon aside. 6 months later, he took his own life, unable to bear the weight of his failure to protect her. Mason's jaw clenched beneath his beard. "I found myself at the orphanage in Coldridge until I grew strong enough to labor in the timber camps." Valora felt a constriction in her throat. This unknown figure had endured her own torment long before she ever did. "I apologize." Mason's gaze sharpened, landing squarely on her face. "Refrain from doing so. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't my doing in Belwick either," she murmured, her voice heavy with the weight of the past month's anguish. "I made an effort to rescue those children. I have faith in you." 3 straightforward words. Yet, they unfastened a part of Valora's heart that had been constricted since the moment they took James away from their lives. Mason stood up and placed another log onto the flames, watching as the fire crackled and danced with renewed vigor. Flames danced into the night, luminous like celestial bodies in the void. "You're welcome to spend the night here. Tomorrow, if you're feeling more resilient, we can discuss what lies ahead. What comes next?" The idea felt unfamiliar to Valora. She had concentrated entirely on making it through every hour, every day. The future was no longer a reality. "Unless you intend to accompany your husband," Mason stated plainly. The mere mention of James jolted her senses. "How did you manage that?" Mason elaborated on the grave marker situated outside the barn. "This morning, while I was tracking deer, I caught sight of it. That's how I realized someone was residing there." Valora gazed into her half-empty bowl, observing the broth quiver beneath her unsteady hands. She crafted a makeshift cross from splintered fence boards, etching James's name with a nail. That was everything she had to give him. "I don't want to die," she confessed, taken aback by the honesty of her own words. In spite of all odds, a tenacious spark continued to flicker inside her, determined not to be snuffed out. Mason nodded, as though her response fulfilled a question that lingered unspoken. "It's essential to regain your strength." To underscore his point, he set another piece of bread next to her bowl. In the stillness that ensued, Valora sensed the tempest beyond, raging against the cabin's resilient structure. The very wind that once sliced through her tattered garments like blades now found no purchase against her. "Are you residing here by yourself?" she inquired, her eyes sweeping across the confined area. Evidence of a life lived in solitude was apparent. A solitary chair next to the writing desk, a single cup resting by the wash basin, and one pillow placed on the narrow bed tucked into the corner. "It's just me," Mason confirmed. "And now you, for however long you require." The straightforward statement lingered in the atmosphere surrounding them. Valora was aware that she ought to feel fear or at the very least caution. She found herself isolated in a cabin, far removed from civilization, in the company of a man she had only just encountered. Yet, dread demanded a vitality she had long since lost. Moreover, her intuition indicated that Mason Blackwood posed no danger to her, at least not in the significant sense. "I can't pay you," she stated openly. They seized it all. Mason's demeanor shifted to one of shadow and intensity. "I'm not requesting any compensation. Each person has their own desires," Valora responded, drawing from a wealth of hard-earned experience. "Indeed," Mason concurred, catching her off guard. "I want to rest at night with the assurance that I didn't abandon someone to the cold when I had the chance to make a difference. That concludes everything." Valora examined his expression, searching for any signs of deceit and discovering none. This man stood apart from the residents of Belwick, whose smiles seemed to lack genuine warmth. His rough demeanor conveyed a deeper truth than their insincere worry ever could. "I was a healer," she declared abruptly, wanting him to understand that she hadn't always been this shattered being. "Individuals traveled from 3 counties for my solutions. Before they concluded that you were to blame for their troubles, Mason completed it for her." Valora nodded, her throat constricted. "People often dread the unknown," Mason remarked, standing up to inspect whatever was simmering in the pot above the flames. "They despise the sensation of powerlessness. It's simpler to point fingers at a knowledgeable woman than to acknowledge that certain ailments are beyond our control." His perspective took her by surprise. The lumberjack, with his strong hands and reserved demeanor, perceived truths more sharply than the learned men of Belwick who had judged her. As Mason stirred the pot, Valora's gaze caught a long scar stretching from his wrist up beneath his rolled sleeve. Instinctively, she extended her hand as he walked by, her fingertips lightly grazing the textured skin. She noted the poor stitching. The healer's instincts took precedence, momentarily eclipsing all else. Mason halted at her touch, then gradually lowered his arm to give her a clearer view. "A logging accident occurred 2 summers ago. The closest doctor was a full day's journey away. I accomplished it on my own." Valora delicately followed the jagged line with her fingertip. This heel could have been cleaner, reduced discomfort afterwards. "Well, you weren't present at that time," Mason remarked plainly. "No," Valora conceded, pulling her hand back. "I was not." Their gazes locked in the confined area, and an unvoiced connection flickered between them. Acknowledgement, perhaps, of 2 spirits shaped by the harshness of existence yet unyielding in their resilience. The tranquility was abruptly disrupted by a forceful knock on the cabin door, shaking the very hinges with its intensity. Valora felt a surge of anxiety as Mason's expression shifted ominously. He glided quickly to the corner where his shotgun rested against the wall. "Blackwood, we know you're inside," a voice echoed that Valora recognized with unsettling precision. "Silas Pruitt, the leader of the Belwick Town Council. Reveal what's inside or we'll dismantle it." Mason's gaze locked onto Valora's, deciphering the fear etched across her features. He spoke softly, gesturing towards a trap door that was partially concealed beneath a woven rug, revealing the root cellar. As Valora hurried to comply, she heard the unmistakable sound of Mason Chamber loading his shotgun. The noise was simultaneously alarming and soothing. This unfamiliar figure was ready to shield her from her tormentors, yet would his safeguard turn into yet another burden she would bear on her conscience? As she descended into the shadowy void beneath the cabin floor, gripping the ladder with quaking hands, Valora found herself lost in thought. Had she evaded one snare only to stumble into another, perhaps far more perilous? "Step forward, sorceress!" Silas Pruitt's voice resonated powerfully through the floorboards above Valora's head. She pressed herself against the earthen wall of the root cellar, her heart pounding so fiercely she worried they might catch the sound. Jars filled with preserved vegetables adorned the shelves surrounding her, their contents shrouded in mystery beneath the dim light seeping through the cracks of the trap door. "I'm not sure I understand what you're referring to, Pruitt." Mason's voice resonated with a steady calmness, yet Valora was acutely aware that he was likely positioned just beyond his door, shotgun at the ready. "It's just me and my meal, no witch in sight." "We followed her trail to this very spot," another voice asserted. "Henry Levi, the son of the pastor, traced her footsteps in the snow." "Then perhaps you should have your vision examined," Mason responded. "The only footprints in the snow belong to me and the deer I've been pursuing." Valora paused, her heart racing, praying they would trust him. She envisioned Mason as she had last encountered him, his imposing figure occupying the entrance, the flickering firelight reflecting off his shotgun barrel. Though she hardly knew him, he was willing to sacrifice it all for her safety. "We are fully entitled to conduct a search of your property, Blackwood." Pruitt's voice had adopted the pompous tone Valora recalled from town meetings. "This woman poses a significant threat. Since her disappearance, 3 additional children have become unwell. It must be some formidable sorcery," Mason remarked with a hint of sarcasm, "to inflict illness from such a distance. Or perhaps your town is simply constructed atop a marshy landscape." A clash of footwear. Then Pruitt's voice lowered to a menacing growl. "Move over, Lumberjack. This battle doesn't belong to you." "You are encroaching on my property," Mason replied. "That turns it into my battle." The unmistakable sound of the shotgun being raised spoke volumes. Valora clenched her fist against her mouth to suppress a gasp. Pruitt issued a warning, stating that next time they would return with the sheriff. Mason responded that the sheriff has no authority this far out. "However, feel free to bring him along if it brings you comfort. Leave my property at once, or I might just consider my dinner could use some fresh meat." Resounding footsteps faded away, accompanied by the frustrated shouts of men compelled to yield. It was only after the sound of horses had receded into the distance that the trap door above Valora let out a creak, unveiling Mason's bearded visage. "They've vanished," he remarked, offering his hand to assist her in standing. At this moment, Valora's legs quaked as she re-entered the cozy embrace of the cabin. The meal she had consumed earlier twisted uneasily in her stomach, menaced by anxiety, poised to resurface. "They'll return," she murmured, settling into the chair beside the flickering flames. Mason nodded, placing his shotgun back in the corner as was customary. "Not this evening. The storms are intensifying once more." He pointed to the window, where snow danced in the shadows like restless spirits. "We have until at least morning." "Good morning," the term used to signify hope. A brand new day, filled with endless opportunities. Now it hung there, ominous and foreboding, like a sentence waiting to be carried out. "I should leave," Valora said, even as her body protested at the mere idea of facing the biting cold again. "I've already placed you in peril." Mason's expression grew stern. "And where would that be precisely?" "Everywhere. A place where I can remain hidden." Even to her own ears the term resonated with emptiness. Mason tended to the fire, unleashing a cascade of sparks that danced up the chimney. "In this weather you wouldn't even manage to cover 5 miles. "I'd rather perish in the cold than bring ruin to your doorstep," Valora declared, standing unsteadily. Mason advanced with unexpected swiftness for someone of his size, obstructing her route to the door. "The entrance to my space. It's my decision regarding who is allowed in and who is not." They confronted one another, both resolute in their stance. Valora observed nuances about him that had previously escaped her attention. A scar bisecting his right eyebrow, the hints of gray in his dark beard despite him likely being no older than her 32 years, the manner in which his left hand curled subtly, as if it had been broken and hadn't mended properly. "What compels one to stand up for someone they don't know?" she inquired gently. "You are unfamiliar with my identity." "I've got sufficient knowledge," Mason replied. "I understand the implications when powerful men Henry. A woman is a threat, eh?" The straightforward honesty in his words unleashed something deep within Valora, a barrier containing not only sorrow but fury. Fury surged within her, fueled by the injustice of James's untimely demise and the countless losses that had been inflicted upon her. "They took my husband from me," she said, her voice trembling. "Not in a direct manner. They didn't execute him or take his life, but the outcome felt just as grim. They assaulted him, forced us out of our home in the cold of winter, fully aware of the consequences." Mason provided genuine support without resorting to hollow reassurances or meaningless phrases. He merely nodded and replied, "Share with me about him." Valora was taken by surprise by the request. No one had inquired about James since his passing, as though uttering his name could somehow transmit the darkness they thought she possessed. "He was a carpenter," she started cautiously, "the finest in Belwick. With his hands, he could draw forth elegance from the simplest block of wood." The haunting image of those lifeless hands, frozen in their finality, loomed over her, yet she persevered. He cherished spring above all other seasons, claiming it was the world experiencing a rebirth. While she spoke, Mason busied herself in the cabin, collecting blankets and tossing another log onto the fire. The straightforward tasks allowed her the opportunity to gather her thoughts, to recall James as he once was, rather than how he had ultimately become. She concluded softly, "He had faith in me." Even at the conclusion, when all others had averted their gaze, Mason halted his tasks, locking eyes with her from across the space. Then uphold that conviction by persevering. Outside, the wind roared with a fierce intensity, shaking the cabin's shutters as if it were alive. Within the confines of the room, an understated change occurred between them, a hint of trust emerging, though not fully formed. "We'll depart at dawn," Mason declared, laying a blanket on the floor next to the hearth. "I have knowledge of locations that will escape their notice." "We," Valora resonated. He stated plainly, "You can't do it by yourself." "I've been contemplating a change for some time now." The nonchalant manner in which he proposed to intertwine his existence with hers was nearly overwhelming. "It wouldn't be fair for me to request that from you. You didn't inquire." I extended my offer. Mason pointed towards the slim bed embedded in the wall. "Embrace that this evening. It's essential to take genuine time to recharge. I will remain vigilant." Overwhelmed and weary, Valora collapsed onto the bed. The pillow carried the fragrance of pine and wood smoke, a reminder of Mason. The blanket enveloped her with its weight and warmth, wrapping her in a surprising embrace of comfort. "What happens if they return before dawn?" she whispered, drifting into slumber even with her apprehension lingering. "Then they'll discover why the logging camps referred to me as the bear," Mason said, inspecting the shotgun one final time before taking a seat by the door. Valora felt the urge to inquire about his meaning, yet the embrace of sleep enveloped her, drawing her into a depth she hadn't experienced in weeks. Her final conscious thought lingered on the notion that the morrow would either usher in salvation or herald destruction, and for the first time since James's passing, she found herself not confronting it in solitude. In the shadowy moments preceding dawn, Mason glided quietly through the cabin, collecting only the essentials: food, ammunition, his keenest axe, and the medicine bundle his mother had shown him how to prepare before the townsfolk took her away. He stole occasional glances at the woman in slumber, observing how the harsh lines of pain and hunger had eased slightly in her peaceful repose. He had revealed the truth to her earlier. He had been contemplating moving on. This cabin was filled with countless lonely nights, an abundance of memories tied to the return to solitude. Yet, he never intended to depart alongside a woman branded as a witch, a woman whose gaze mirrored the same haunted expression his mother wore all those years prior. As he packed, Mason pondered the curious turn of events that had compelled him to follow that deer beyond the deserted farm the day before, contemplating the unseen connection that had intertwined his life with Valora Finch's precisely when she required rescue. His mother would have attributed it to the influence of spirits, while the pastor would declare it as the manifestation of divine will. Mason couldn't Henry it, yet he felt its heaviness keenly. The storm outside started to subside, revealing stars that twinkled between the swiftly moving clouds. Before long, the dawn would break, making it suitable for a journey. Before long, they would depart from this location that had served as both his sanctuary and his confinement for 3 long winters. As the darkness slowly yielded to the light of dawn, Mason discovered a sensation he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. The forest unfolded ahead, resembling a vast white sea, boundless and perilous. 2 days had elapsed since they departed from Mason's cabin in the dim light of dawn, journeying northwest through uncharted woods where few souls dared to tread. Valora's legs ached with every stride, yet she was determined to maintain her speed. Each snap of a branch in the shadows quickened her heartbeat, filling her with dread that Belwick's men were hot on their heels. "We'll pause here," Mason declared, gesturing toward a rugged outcropping that offered a natural refuge from the wind. As the lights flickered and dimmed, Valora sank down with relief against a fallen log, while Mason busied himself with the task of setting up camp, his movements smooth and assured. In just 2 days, she discovered that the imposing figure was economical, with both his words and his actions. Every action he took had a reason behind it. He directed, pointing to a circle of stones that had been arranged long ago. "Build a fire there, petite." We aim to keep the air clear above the treetops. Valora collected twigs with icy fingers, meticulously arranging them just as James had shown her during their summer fishing excursions. The recollection of her husband had ceased to evoke that sharp ache deep within her. Instead, it felt like a soft touch on her shoulder, a reminder of affection rather than sorrow. As night enveloped the surroundings, the flickering flames of the modest fire created lively silhouettes upon the snow. Mason came back from laying traps, triumphantly carrying 2 rabbits he had already caught. His abilities in the forest were almost supernatural. He understood the land as Valora once understood her grandmother's herbal guide, sensing where sustenance could be discovered and where threats might be hidden. "The tracks have vanished," he remarked, as he sat down next to her to prepare the rabbits. "The storm enveloped them. Even if they trailed us from the cabin, they must have lost our scent by now." A wave of relief swept over Valora, yet she understood it was fleeting. "Where are we headed?" she inquired, the query she had dreaded articulating until this moment. Mason persisted in his meticulous task with the knife. "My mother's kin have a settlement 3 days north of this place. Those outside refer to them as Indians. Abenaki is the name they have chosen for themselves." Surprise caused Valora to scrutinize him with greater intensity. She had believed his deep complexion was a result of spending time in the open air. Yet, she became aware of the pronounced cheekbones and the subtle crease at the edges of his eyes. "Was your mother Abenaki?" she inquired. Mason gave a slight nod. "My father was a trapper from France." Their paths crossed when he arrived in her village with a collection of furs. Upon their marriage, she settled close to Coleridge and adapted to his lifestyle. His jaw clenched, ultimately failing to shield her. Clarity blossomed in Valora's mind. That's why they all Henried her a witch. She utilized plants and remedies that were unfamiliar to them. Mason remarked with a straightforward tone, piercing the rabbit meat onto green sticks to roast above the flames, highlighting the profound nature of the white man's fear, anxiety surrounding the unfamiliar, what lies beyond their grasp. Like a woman who mends without formal education, Valora contemplated but kept silent. The similarities between Mason's mother and her own self were clear to her. "Will your mother's family embrace us?" she inquired instead. Mason's expression became a touch gentler. "My grandmother is still alive. She has reached an advanced age now. If she embraces you, the rest will follow suit. If she chooses not to, we simply continue on our path, without a moment's pause, without a flicker of uncertainty. No matter what came their way, they would confront it side by side." As they savored the rabbit in a comfortable quiet, Valora realized how significantly everything had shifted in merely a few days. A week prior, she found herself in a state of hunger and isolation, convinced that death was imminent. Now she sat beside a fire, her belly full, and a flicker of something akin to hope radiating warmth in her chest. "Thank you," she exclaimed unexpectedly. "For everything." Mason glanced upward, momentarily surprised by the unpretentious appreciation. For an instant his composed facade faltered, exposing a hint of fragility underneath. "Hold off on the gratitude for now," he said in a rough tone. "Tomorrow, we face the challenge of crossing mountains." Once they finished their meal, Mason spread out a collection of furs for her to rest upon. "Cease your activities," he commanded. "I'll handle the first watch." Valora felt a surge of determination to argue that she could take a turn on watch, yet fatigue weighed down her limbs, rendering her silent. She enveloped herself in the offered blanket, astonished by how swiftly slumber overtook her, even in their vulnerable state. After a long stretch of time, a sudden movement roused her from slumber. Silence reigns, yet its void is palpable. The woods fell into complete stillness. Silence envelops the surroundings, devoid of rustling leaves or the calls of night birds, leaving only emptiness. Next to her, Mason stood upright, rifle grasped firmly, his body taut and ready like a tightly wound spring.
What is it exactly?
She murmured softly, standing up to join him. Not what you expected. Whom? Mason gestured toward the shadows that loomed beyond their flickering fire. It seems we are under observation. Valora gazed into the dark expanse of trees. Initially perceiving nothing, a shadow shifted, distinct from the darkness. A silhouette emerged from the dim light of the fading flames. A figure clad in furs and leather, his visage adorned with elaborate patterns of paint or tattoos. Behind him, two additional figures emerged as if conjured from the very air around them. To Valora's astonishment, Mason set aside his rifle and approached, uttering phrases in a tongue that was foreign to her. The sounds flowed seamlessly, a stark contrast to the jarring English or the sporadic French she had encountered at the trading post close to Belwick. The main character replied in the same language, his posture easing a bit. Following a short interaction, he shifted his focus to Valora, his dark eyes evaluating her with a neutral expression, neither inviting nor confrontational.
What's going on?
She murmured softly to Mason. He spoke softly about the Abenaki hunters. Whispers reached them of unfamiliar faces encroaching upon their winter hunting grounds. They arrived to determine whether we posed a threat or extended friendship.
And who do we represent?
Not yet, Mason responded. I shared my identity, revealing the legacies of my mother and grandmother. They will lead us to the winter camp. The decision rests with the elders. The chief tracker addressed the group once more, pointing towards the east. We shall proceed now, Mason conveyed.
It's just a short distance away.
At this moment, within the shadows. Valora surveyed their modest camp, noting the scant comforts they had managed to create. It's wiser to journey through the shadows, Mason remarked, as he began to collect their scant belongings. Less attention as we move by. Valora understood immediately whose eyes he was referring to. Belwick's influence may extend far and wide, yet within these timeless woods, other forces reign supreme, forces that predate both clergy and municipal authorities. As they trailed the quiet predators through the illuminated forest, Valora sensed she had entered a realm entirely different, where the familiar laws of her existence seemed to fade away. A portion of her was apprehensive about what lay ahead at the Abenaki camp, while another part was exhilarated by the idea of a realm free from Belwick's control. The journey lasted under an hour. The winter camp emerged unexpectedly, a collection of dome-shaped structures draped in bark and hides, tucked away in a sheltered valley. Faint flames flickered from the heart of the structure, releasing tendrils of smoke that danced into the vast expanse of the starlit heavens. As they drew near, the dogs raised a cacophony of barks, only to be swiftly silenced by gentle words of reassurance. In the biting chill, figures stepped out from their homes, cloaked in furs for warmth. They assembled quietly, observing the newcomers with a blend of intrigue and caution. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, their eyes wide with wonder at the sight of Valora's pale skin and light hair. An elderly woman made her way through the assembled crowd. Even with the passage of time, she carried herself with confidence, her silver hair elegantly styled in two long braids adorned with vibrant thread. Her face bore the marks of countless tales, yet her eyes shone with the clarity and precision of a hawk's gaze. The woman examined him intently for a prolonged moment, then lifted her hand to caress his bearded face. She uttered a solitary word, her voice trembling with deep feeling. "Grandmother," Mason said in English, leaning down to wrap his arms around her small figure. The elderly woman's eyes moved to Valora, who lingered uncomfortably to one side, painfully conscious of her worn dress and disheveled hair. The examination was piercing, as though the elder possessed the ability to peer past the skin and into the very essence within. At last, the elderly woman began to speak, directing her gaze at Mason for interpretation. "She inquired about the weight you bear," Mason remarked to Valora. "She perceives a darkness within your gaze." Valora paused, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. How could she articulate the situation with Belwick, James, the allegations, and the loss in a manner that these individuals would grasp? Yet something in the old woman's eyes suggested that comprehension could be more attainable here than in the world she had departed. "Convey to her that I've been evading those who are afraid of what they cannot comprehend," Valora stated thoughtfully. "Those who henried me a witch for my attempts to heal using plants and herbs," Mason translated. The elderly woman heard the words, then chuckled softly. An unexpected sound pierced through the gathering, catching everyone off guard. She spoke quickly, waving her hand toward one of the houses. "What were her words?" Valora inquired. The corner of Mason's mouth lifted, revealing the nearest semblance of a smile she had ever witnessed from him. "She claimed that only white men would be afraid of a healer. In this place, such gifts are revered." He took a moment, then continued. "She mentioned that you will be spending the night in her lodge. Tomorrow, she will determine the sincerity of your heart." As the crowd faded away and Mason guided her toward his grandmother's home, Valora sensed a feeling she hadn't encountered since before James's passing. The feeling of firm earth underfoot, with opportunities extending far beyond just existing. As they stepped into the cozy embrace of the lodge, a fresh concern began to eat away at her thoughts. Would finding acceptance among these people, this refuge, require leaving Mason behind? And why did that thought stir a pang in her chest that was unrelated to fear? The heavens deepened into an ominous shade as tempestuous clouds coalesced over the quaint cabin. Valora startled at the abrupt crash of the shutters against the wall. Her heart raced like that of a frightened rabbit. She hurried to the window and grasped the wooden frames firmly against the fierce wind. A presence loomed, more ominous than the tempest itself. "They're assembling in town," Mason remarked, his voice barely above a whisper as he entered the room. The snow dripped from his thick coat, forming small pools on the ground. In his grasp, he held a modest sack of cornmeal, the only bounty he could secure. "I overheard their conversation at the trading post. They hold you responsible for the recent illness affecting their cattle." Valora's fingers traced the birthmark hidden beneath her collar, the mark that drew curious glances and hushed conversations, the mark that had led to James's tragic end. "What is our time frame?" she inquired, already beginning to collect her sparse possessions. Mason dismissed the notion with a shake of his head. "It won't take long. Perhaps just a day or even less." The winds outside howled through the pine trees, echoing a sense of foreboding. Within the confines of the room, Valora and Mason advanced with a silent determination, readying themselves for a confrontation they wished to avoid. Valora retrieved a wooden box from beneath her sleeping pallet. Within were desiccated herbs and small vials of remedies she had crafted from the flora of the woods. Her fingers quivered as she sifted through them. These straightforward solutions had previously brought her joy and gratitude. Now they stood as evidence of her alleged malevolence. "I should run," she whispered, mostly to herself rather than to Mason. "Guide them away from this place." Mason's substantial hand enveloped hers, calming her anxious fidgeting. "Absolutely not," he replied with conviction. "We confront this as one." The term together lingered in the atmosphere surrounding them. Since Mason discovered her half-frozen in the woods, a delicate bond had formed between them, as fragile as the first shoots of spring yet equally resolute in its desire to thrive. Valora raised her gaze to him, truly observing. The sharp contours of his face had relaxed as he addressed her in that moment. His blue eyes, previously as frigid as a winter sky, now radiated warmth when they connected with hers. "What makes you willing to put yourself on the line for me?" she inquired. "They hold no animosity towards you." Mason averted his gaze, preoccupied with inspecting the shotgun that was mounted above the door. "Perhaps I'm weary of seeing decent individuals endure pain due to the lack of understanding from others." As night descended, they toiled together, securing windows, laying tripwires around the clearing to signal any intruders, and transporting food and water to the cellar in preparation for a potential retreat. The steady beat of hammering nails and organizing materials pushed the anxiety aside. As the rain started to pour, drumming on the roof like eager hands, Valora halted her tasks. "What if they truly have a point about me?" she inquired softly. Mason lifted his gaze from the task of honing his hunting knife. "Could you clarify what you mean? What if I am under a spell? It appears that those in my vicinity are enduring hardship. James, the youngsters in Belwick, and now the animals." "That's absurd," Mason stated with conviction. "Contaminated water leads to illness. Severe winters can be fatal for cattle. Individuals often seek a target for their frustrations. So, what's the reason for your assistance?" Valora insisted. "Why not just hand me over and finish this once and for all?" Mason placed his knife aside and rose to his full height, his imposing figure creating an elongated silhouette in the glow of the lamp. For a brief instant, he appeared to grapple with his words, his typical assurance wavering. For he ultimately declared, "I have witnessed your true essence." What is that? He stated it plainly. Kind, powerful, deserving of the struggle. The words lingered in the air, a delicate bridge neither was prepared to traverse. Valora sensed a warmth flush her cheeks, unrelated to the flames crackling in the hearth. A jarring crash outside shattered the tranquility of the moment. With a quick, decisive movement, Mason seized his shotgun and approached the door. Valora grasped the hunting knife tightly, her knuckles pale against the handle. "Stay behind me," Mason murmured, gently cracking the door open. The rain transformed into sleet, enveloping the landscape in a glossy veneer of ice. Beyond the veil of icy droplets, a shadowy figure glided through the open space. "Neither quite a man nor entirely a fox. It's just a dog," Mason remarked, easing his grip on the gun a bit. "Appears to be quite undernourished." Valora glanced over his shoulder. The creature hobbled toward the cabin, its ribs visible beneath the tangled fur. One of its front paws was stained with blood. "It hurts," she said, already reaching for her box of remedies. "It might be a trap," Mason cautioned. "It's possible they sent it in advance." Valora paused for a moment, then firmly shook her head. "It's hard to believe anyone would go so far as to hurt a dog in order to get to me." She surged forward, breaking through the icy downpour. The dog emitted a faint growl as she drew near, revealing its yellowed teeth. Valora knelt down, extending her hand, allowing the creature to take in her scent. "It's okay," she whispered softly. "I assure you I mean no harm." Gradually the growl diminished. The dog cautiously approached, sniffing her hand before offering a gentle lick. Valora approached with intent, scrutinizing the injured paw. A metallic snare had cut deeply into the skin. "Mason," she said, "I seek illumination." He emerged beside her, a lantern in one hand while his other firmly held the shotgun. His gaze sweeping the tree line, he urged, "Make it quick. We're laid bare out here." Valora moved with purpose, rinsing the injury with water from her flask, placing a yarrow poultice to staunch the flow of blood, and wrapping the paw with strips ripped from her petticoat. The dog let out a soft whimper, yet refrained from biting. There," she comforted as she completed her task. "You are secure." In a moment that seemed to convey a deep connection, the dog leaned its wet head against her hand, embodying a profound sense of trust. A subtle change stirred within Valora's chest, a tight knot of fear easing ever so slightly. Within the cozy confines of the cabin, the dog nestled before the crackling fire, steam wafting from its fur as it dried off. Mason observed Valora diligently crafting a delicate broth for the creature. "You ought to have let it be," he remarked, though his tone lacked any sharpness. "So you think I should have been left behind?" She responded with a faint hint of a smile. Just as Mason was about to respond, a faint shout echoed through the tempest. Next came one more, followed by yet another. The shouts of furious individuals. "They are approaching," Mason remarked with a serious tone. "Sooner than I anticipated." Valora's hands paused over the pot of broth. The dog lifted its head, ears alert to the noise. "What is the quantity?" she inquired. Mason approached the window, gazing through a narrow opening in the boards. A dozen, perhaps even more, brandishing torches in spite of the rain. His jaw clenched, and they had brought rope. Fear gripped Valora's throat, poised to suffocate her. The image of James, ghostly and trembling with fever as they escaped Belwick, surged in her mind. She clutched his hand tightly until the very last moment, vowing that they would discover a fresh start, a place to call their own, yet another unfulfilled vow in a life brimming with them. "I won't run this time," she declared, her posture firm and resolute. "I finished my race. Mason shifted his gaze toward her, truly observing her. Not as the half-frozen woman he had saved during the winter, but as the individual she had transformed into within his home, within the confines of their residence. "Then we rise," he remarked, extending his hand toward hers. His rough palm enveloped her delicate one, bringing warmth to it. With a hesitant rise, the dog approached Valora, its unsteady legs carrying it to her side. It leaned against her skirts, a silent gesture of loyalty and guardianship. Three misfits standing strong against the world. The sounds from outside intensified, the crisp sound of twigs breaking beneath my feet, the rhythmic sound of boots splashing through puddles. A rare expletive escaped as someone lost their footing on the frozen surface, and underneath it all the relentless rhythm of animosity. Which? Valora shut her eyes, inhaling deeply to calm her racing thoughts. As she reopened her eyes, the fear had transformed into something more resolute. Resolve. "I have a plan," she murmured softly. Mason arched an eyebrow. "I'm all ears. I would like to speak with them." "They've moved beyond conversation," Mason contended. "You've listened closely. They seek vengeance. Choosing silence for my own protection, Valora elaborated. To rescue them, she motioned toward her collection of remedies. I believe I have identified the cause of the illness affecting their cattle. If I'm correct, their offspring might be the next in line. Realization flickered in Mason's eyes. Valora nodded in agreement about the water, the same that claimed James, the very thing that took the lives of the children previously. The sudden thud at the door interrupted their exchange. A voice they recognized as Silas Pruitt's called out, Mason Blackwood, release the witch and you shall remain unharmed. Mason's grip on Valora's hand grew firmer. If I'm mistaken, at least I can say I gave it my all, she concluded. With a final hesitant gesture, Mason let go of her hand and approached the door. The dog emitted a low growl from deep within as he raised the bar. Any individual who approaches with malice in their heart will depart in a manner they did not anticipate. Mason shouted from the other side of the door. The lady desires to converse. Those who can listen with tranquility are invited to engage. A brief pause of bewildered murmurs ensued after his statement. Once more, Pruitt's voice echoed. There are no deceptions here, Blackwood. Our focus is solely on the witch. With a menacing calm, Mason revealed her name, Valora Finch. He flung the door wide, a towering figure in the doorway, the shotgun poised and resting against the earth. A communication that serves as both an alert and a caution. In the distance, faces illuminated with a warm orange hue from the flickering torches. Visages contorted by dread and animosity. Visages Valora had previously mended with her potions. She advanced to greet them, the rescued dog limping loyally beside her, oblivious to the fact that their lives would transform before dawn arrived. Crimson droplets cascaded from Mason's split lip, painting the wooden floor with vivid splashes of red. His hands, bound securely behind him, had lost all feeling hours earlier. The cabin's main room, which had once been a sanctuary of comfort and security, now resembled a prison filled with lurking threats. "Tell us again how you found her," demanded Sheriff Mills, a man whose badge appeared to grant him a license for cruelty rather than the pursuit of justice. At the table, Valora remained tense, her wrists secured to the arms of the chair. Her expression revealed no trace of fear, only a fierce, smoldering rage that caused her green eyes to shine brightly in the lamplight. "I told you," Mason said, his teeth grinding together. She felt an intense hunger. "I assisted her. Acts of kindness are never wrong." "Showing kindness to a witch is a sin against God," Silas Pruitt declared with disdain. His gaunt visage burned with a fierce indignation. "Yesterday my beloved Bessie cow passed away. Thriving one moment, gone the next." "That's the work of the devil, or poison in your stream," Valora said quietly, her voice breaking the silence since they had burst into the cabin. "The very toxin that took the lives of your children last winter." Her words shattered the stillness. All the men in the room fixed their gazes on her, some filled with animosity, others with discomfort, and a handful beginning to question their own convictions. The injured dog, cowering under the table, emitted a low growl at Pruitt as he approached Valora with his hand lifted. "Silence, sorceress. Additional malevolent falsehoods." A new voice interjected. "Let her speak." The crowd opened up to let Pastor Thomas Webb through, his attire soaked from the rain, his expression serious and weathered. Pruitt stammered as he recounted these assertions. "Pastor, surely you can't be serious." The pastor stated with conviction, "I believe in evidence, Silas. Today, 3 additional children have fallen ill." He gave a nod to Valora, indicating there might be a possibility. "Express your thoughts, woman." Valora sat up in her chair, her eyes scanning the faces around her. She began with the new mining camp upstream. "Have you observed the water since their arrival? The peculiar hue that appears on certain mornings? The peculiar aroma?" Whispers circulated among the crowd. The pastor's brows knitted in concentration. "Proceed." "Mercury is utilized to extract silver from ore," Valora elaborated. "It permeates the earth, infiltrating the water. Initially, it devastates fish, followed by livestock, and ultimately it claims human lives." Pruitt exclaimed in disbelief, "Nonsense!" "She's attempting to deflect responsibility for her sorcery." However, some were slowly nodding in agreement. The artisan whose workshop was by the stream, the miller who toiled with water each day, the physician whose expression revealed a growing sense of dread. "The symptoms align," the doctor conceded with some hesitation. "Shaking, uncertainty, abdominal discomfort. You've fallen under her spell as well. Pruitt surged at Valora, his expression contorted with fury. The dog leaped from under the table with a fierce growl, biting down on Pruitt's leg. The man let out a piercing howl, thrashing about as voices rose in a frenzy and bodies darted in the now tumultuous space. "Enough!" shouted Pastor Webb, his voice piercing through the noise. He glanced over at Sheriff Mills. "Let go of her hands and Mason's as well." However, the sheriff started to speak. "Pastor, now Mills, I will take full responsibility." As Valora massaged her wrists to restore sensation, the pastor took a knee beside her chair. "If your statement holds validity, what steps can we take to substantiate it?" "Collect water samples," she instructed, "from upstream of the mining camp and downstream. Dispatch them to the university located in the city. Poison testing is possible." The doctor noted that it might take weeks. "Then refrain from drinking from the creek until you have certainty." Mason let out a low growl, extending his liberated arms. "Certainly, that's a more straightforward option than executing an innocent woman." A profound stillness enveloped the scene. The men shared knowing looks. Some feel a sense of shame, while others remain wary. "What about our illness?" A soft voice emerged from the rear. A woman had stepped inside, Martha Green, whose youngest child was among those recently afflicted. Valora rose with a measured grace, her actions steady and intentional. "I can assist in alleviating their symptoms as we await confirmation. However, you need to relocate them from the creek water initially. Utilize the spring located on the eastern hill for your drinking needs." Pastor Webb gazed intently at her face for an extended moment. "Would you assist those who sought to bring you down?" "Before I was Henried a witch, I was a healer," Valora replied with ease. "That remains the same." As the first light of dawn broke, the cabin had morphed into an impromptu clinic. Young ones with quivering limbs and bewildered gazes rested on makeshift beds near the flickering flames. Parents who had moments ago called for Valora's demise now observed with bated breath as she tended to each patient, dispensing herbal teas and poultices from her wooden box of remedies. Mason collaborated with her, retrieving fresh water from the pristine spring, stoking the fire to provide warmth for the trembling children, his quiet strength complementing her nurturing abilities. "The fever is breaking," Valora whispered, as she gently touched the small girl's forehead. "She will find peace in her slumber now." The child's father, the very man who had brought rope to the cabin, nodded silently, his eyes cast down in shame. Outside, the riders set off for the city, carrying water samples and an important message for the mining inspector. Sheriff Mills set out to challenge the mine foreman regarding their suspicions. Pastor Webb positioned himself at Mason's table, diligently jotting down notes while Valora elaborated on the symptoms of mercury poisoning and the potential treatments that could provide relief. He spoke softly as she hesitated. "I was mistaken about you." "Everyone was." "Fear shapes perception," Valora remarked, her hands unwavering as she ground willow bark for a soothing tea. What was it that Mason observed? The pastor observed, his gaze fixed on the large figure as he tenderly raised the ailing child to take a sip. A faint smile graced Valora's lips, a person deserving of rescue. As the morning light seeped through the gaps in the boarded windows, Silas Pruitt stormed through the door, his face pale and drawn. "The mine foreman has vanished," he declared, "disappeared under the cover of darkness, leaving this behind." He extended a folded paper to the pastor, and as Webb unfolded it, his expression darkened with every line he scanned. "It's a receipt," he finally revealed, "for payments made to Silas Pruitt in return for his silence on water quality issues." Every gaze fixated on Pruitt, who appeared to diminish in their presence. "They claimed it was merely mud agitated," he murmured, asserted it would eventually calm down. "They spent a significant amount. Funds earned at the expense of innocent lives," Mason remarked, his tone chillingly calm. Pruitt sank to his knees. "I had no idea. I promise you. I truly had no idea." The stillness that ensued was pierced by the soft whimper of an ailing child. Without a moment's pause, Valora went back to her patient, leaving Pruitt to confront the scrutiny in his neighbor's gaze. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden and pink hue across the western sky, Valora ventured outside, relishing the first moment of tranquility she had experienced since the night unfolded. The air was invigorating after the rain, filled with the refreshing essence of spring's arrival. Mason stepped beside her, their shoulders brushing against one another. "You saved them," he murmured, "after everything they did." "I rescued myself as well," Valora responded, from turning into what they dreaded. His hand sought hers, their fingers weaving together. "What occurs once they have recovered?" Valora stared at the far-off mountains, deep in thought. "Some will express gratitude, while others will continue to harbor fear towards the unknown. Such is the nature of humanity." "What about us?" Mason inquired, his tone uncertain in a manner she had never encountered previously. "What is our path?" Valora pivoted to meet him directly, recognizing the unspoken inquiry reflected in his gaze. In response, she stood on her tiptoes and gently pressed her lips against his, a kiss tender like fresh foliage, yet fierce like the torrents of spring. As they said their goodbyes, Mason gently caressed her cheek, as though she were fragile and could shatter at any moment. "I'm not one to speak much," he started, then refrained from using words. Valora smiled. "Simply remain." "I wasn't planning to go anywhere," he replied, a rare smile lighting up his weathered face. The cabin door swung open behind them. Martha Green remained still, cradling a slumbering child in her arms, with tears glistening on her cheeks. She announced that my boy's fever has finally broken, her voice heavy with feeling. I lacked the words to express my gratitude. Valora assured her that no thanks were necessary. Martha resolutely shook her head. "A lot is required, beginning with this." She inhaled deeply. "The town council is scheduled to convene tomorrow. I intend to convey that we require a skilled healer in Belwick, someone well-versed in herbs and remedies." Valora's gaze was met with unwavering intensity. "Would you take it into account, returning? A home awaits for you, for both of you, should you desire it." The proposal lingered, a delightful surprise waiting to be unwrapped. Valora cast a look at Mason, noticing the identical astonishment reflected in his gaze that mirrored her own. "Indeed, we require some time to reflect," she concluded. Martha gave a slight nod. "Absolutely. Rest assured, we are committed to reclaiming what was wrongfully taken from you, if you permit us." As Martha stepped back inside, Valora found solace in Mason's unwavering presence, observing the initial stars emerge in the deepening twilight. "Would you return?" he inquired softly, "following all that has transpired?" Valora pondered the inquiry, sensing the gravity of her history and the allure of what lay ahead, both equally compelling. "Where might you find yourself?" she inquired rather than responding, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. "Wherever you may find yourself." As twilight enveloped the surroundings and the soothing sounds of recovery filled the cabin, Valora grasped the essence of genuine strength. It wasn't the terrifying sorcery Belwick had claimed she possessed, but rather the deep and meaningful power of forgiveness. To mend, to start anew. "Then we'll make a decision together," she murmured, leaning her head against his shoulder. As the moment arrived, a shooting star streaked brilliantly across the sky above them, neither an omen nor a curse, just the universe unfolding its narrative. Exactly as they were. Crimson droplets fell from the thorn scratch on Valora's arm as she leaned down to gather the wild mint flourishing by the stream. She left it there. In a way, the sight of her own blood glistening in the sunlight brought a profound realization of her renewed existence. Half a year had gone by since that dreadful winter when Belwick had banished her to her fate. "Valora! Someone is approaching!" Mason's resonant voice echoed from the cabin clearing. Valora let her gathering basket fall, her heart pounding in her chest. Since the sheriff's visit and Pruitt's arrest, they had received visitors. Yet each approaching stranger still sent a wave of fear twisting in her stomach. Amidst the trees, she caught sight of a small girl limping alongside a concerned woman. Not a threat, but rather someone in need of assistance. The woman spoke as Valora approached. "My Grace has been burning with fever for 3 days. People around here mentioned that you might have some knowledge about healing." The young girl's cheeks burned with fever, her eyes shimmering with a distant gaze. Silently, Valora cradled the child in her embrace. "I'm not a witch," Valora said softly, locking eyes with the mother. "Just someone who comprehends the secrets of plants and their nature." "I don't care what they call you," the woman murmured. "All I desire is for my daughter to thrive." Within the cabin's confines, Mason glided quietly, suspending a pot of water above the flames, as Valora gently placed the child upon her own bed. Her fingers traced the swollen glands in the girl's neck, the fevered forehead, the rapid pulse. First, she murmured to herself, willow bark tea. Next comes the elderberry syrup. The mother lingered nearby, observing as Valora blended her potions. Everyone in Belwick's is buzzing about you, she said, about how mistaken they were. Valora's hands hesitated for just a moment. Is that so? Martha Caldwell's son improved after you provided him with that cough syrup. The joints of Widow Peterson don't ache as much with your presence. Valora offered a subtle smile. And still, you took 3 days before bringing your daughter. The woman cast her gaze downward. My spouse remarked. He expressed that trust should not be given freely. A sorceress? Valora completed it for her. Everything is fine. I comprehend fear. For 3 days, Valora hardly found rest, soothing the child's inflamed skin with refreshing cloths, administering remedies between her chapped lips. Mason brought food that neither Valora nor the mother, who was named Sarah, accepted, moved. As dawn broke on the 4th day, Grace's fever finally subsided. You saved her, Sarah wept, gripping Valora's hands tightly. How will I ever be able to repay you? Speak the truth, Valora stated plainly. That suffices as compensation. News traveled fast. A continuous flow of individuals started to show up. A man bearing a painful, infected injury. Twins suffering from whooping cough. A woman expecting a child, filled with anxiety about the possibility of losing her baby. Valora assisted everyone, requesting only that they contribute what they were able to. Eggs, fabric, a day's work for Mason. You require an appropriate space to create, Mason remarked one evening, observing her meticulously prepare a poultice at the kitchen table. This is not our dining area. Valora glanced upward, taken aback. What are you thinking about? The following day, Mason set about clearing the land adjacent to the cabin. In just a matter of weeks, a modest structure began to emerge. A tranquil space adorned with shelves filled with her healing potions, a bed for those requiring observation, with expansive windows to invite in both light and fresh air. You crafted a witch's cottage for me, Valora playfully remarked once it was complete, yet her eyes sparkled with tears of appreciation. I constructed a healer's house for you, Mason clarified, his indifferent thumb wiping away a tear from her cheek. That night, for the first time, Valora chose not to rest on her pallet by the fire. Instead, she nestled against Mason's broad chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. I never imagined I'd find safety once more, she murmured into the shadows. His embrace grew more intense around her. You are more than merely secure, Valora Finch. Welcome back to your sanctuary. Summer ushered in an unforeseen guest, Pastor Webb from Belwick, the very man who had remained silent when they cast her out. He arrived by himself, hat in hand, appearing older and more diminutive than Valora recalled. Miss Finch, he murmured, his gaze averted. I seek your forgiveness. Valora remained silent, biding her time. I acknowledge our mistake. I acknowledge my mistake. Fear turned us into something harsh. At last he raised his gaze. The water was poisoned by the mining company, not by your practices. Have you heard? Valora inquired softly. What can you tell me about the waste generated from mining activities? The pastor tilted his head in disapproval. Only after it was demonstrated. However, I understood that you were not to blame for the illness. I simply didn't have the bravery to confront the crowd. Mason stood in the entrance of his workshop, observing intently, poised to step in if needed. What is it that you seek from me, Pastor? Valora inquired. I was sent by the town council. They are proposing to give back your belongings, seeking to rectify the situation. A chill took root in Valora's chest. My husband has passed away. My reputation has been shattered. So, you believe that returning what was unjustly taken somehow makes it all okay? No, the pastor replied gently. While it may not be perfect, it's the best we can provide. That evening, Valora perched on the porch steps, gazing up at the stars. Mason settled beside her, the warmth of his shoulder brushing against hers. Are you planning to return? He inquired, his tone meticulously even. To Belwick. Valora picked a blade of grass, deftly twisting it between her fingers. All that awaits me are mere phantoms. Relief eased the lines of Mason's face. And here, I possess. She surveyed the cabin, the sanctuary of restoration, the garden alive with vibrant energy, all that truly counts. The following morning, Valora composed a letter to the Belwick Council. She would not come back, yet she would agree to receive compensation for her property. Not in funds, but in resources for a well-equipped clinic to benefit all the nearby communities. Is Belwick included? Mason inquired as he readied himself to present the letter. Particularly Belwick, Valora asserted with conviction. Illness is indifferent to notions of right or wrong, and my medicine won't either. As August drew to a close, the long-awaited wagons started to roll in, bringing with them the supplies that had been promised. Timber, window panes, suitable bedding, and even healthcare literature from the urban center. Individuals from 3 distinct towns stepped forward to assist Mason in his construction efforts. Women provided sustenance for the laborers. On a sunlit afternoon, as the clinic approached its final touches, Valora seized a moment of solitude with Mason. He was installing a door frame, his shirt soaked with sweat, shavings clinging to his beard. "What motivated you to assist me on that initial day?" she inquired abruptly. "You must have been aware of my identity, of the whispers surrounding me." Mason paused, his tools resting in his hands as he pondered. "My mother resembled you, a nurturer. When I was a boy, they expelled her from her village. We roamed for countless years until her life was claimed by pneumonia, as no one would offer refuge to a witch during the cold winter months." His cerulean gaze locked onto hers. "I was unable to rescue her. Yet upon laying eyes on you," Valora felt a constriction in her throat. "You witnessed her presence." "I witnessed an individual who truly merited kindness, rather than the harshness masked as virtue." She lifted her hand, resting her palm against his bearded cheek. "You rescued me, Mason Blackwood." His substantial hand enveloped hers. "And you rescued yourself, Valora Finch. I merely offered refuge as you rediscovered your power." Their kiss was imbued with the essence of sawdust and the thrill of what could be. That evening, a missive arrived from the county magistrate. The mining company was permanently closed. Significantly, the letter formally exonerated Valora from all allegations of witchcraft. "Justice arrives tardily," Mason observed, as he watched her peruse the official pardon. "Yet it arrives," Valora responded, delicately folding the letter. "That certainly holds significance." The following day, she displayed a sign outside her almost finished clinic. It stated plainly, "Finch Healing House, all welcome." When Eliza Pruitt, the daughter of the man who had spearheaded the opposition against her, arrived plagued by excruciating headaches, Valora extended the same tender care she offered to all. "What motivates you to assist me?" the girl inquired, her expression one of confusion. "Following my father's actions?" Valora gently placed the cool cloth on Eliza's forehead, her touch tender and soothing. Healing transcends the mere act of repairing physical forms. At times, it's about repairing the connections that exist between us. "Is that sorcery at play?" Eliza murmured softly. Valora beamed with delight. "Absolutely not, dear. That's simply part of the human experience." The initial frost adorned the clinic windows with delicate silver designs. Within the cozy confines, Valora gently stirred a bubbling pot of elder syrup, readying herself for the inevitable coughs and chills that winter would bring. Outside, Mason split wood with a steady cadence, each piece falling with a gratifying thump. Neither of them became aware of the approaching wagon until it was almost upon them. Valora cleaned her hands on her apron, narrowing her eyes at the unanticipated guests, a stylish couple accompanied by their chauffeur. "Is this the Finch Healing House?" The woman spoke, her city accent unmistakably clear. "Indeed," Valora responded with a hint of caution. The man assisted his wife as she stepped down from the wagon. "I am Dr. William Thorne, hailing from Capital City. This is my beloved wife, Margaret." He cast a wary eye at the unassuming clinic, skepticism barely hidden beneath the surface. "We've encountered some truly extraordinary tales regarding your therapies." Mason stood beside Valora, axe firmly gripped in his hand. "What type of narratives?" Margaret Thorne advanced with purpose, the kind that inspired hope when urban physicians provided none. As she peeled away her shawl, an alarming crimson rash emerged, sprawling across her neck and jaw. "They claimed it's beyond cure." "Nothing is beyond healing," Valora murmured softly. "Certain matters remain without resolution." Within the clinic's walls, Valora scrutinized Margaret's skin, as Dr. Thorne observed with keen interest. His uncertainty was evident, yet he chose to stay quiet while Valora inquired about his wife's diet, her environment, and the development of the rash. "Have you been journeying for your treatment?" Valora inquired softly, examining the irritated skin with care. Margaret provided confirmation to experts in 3 cities. William's co-workers refer to it as hysteria showing up on the skin. Valora locked eyes with the doctor. "What name do you give it?" "I refer to it as maddening," he confessed. "I've explored every medical treatment documented." Valora acknowledged with a contemplative nod. "At times, the solution lies beyond the pages of literature." She extended her hand towards a jar perched on her shelf. "This may appear to be the work of a sorceress to you, doctor, but it is merely a matter of keen observation. The rash on your wife resembles the reaction that occurs when someone comes into contact with the sap of the ghost maple and then exposes their skin to sunlight." Dr. Thorne scowled. "Phantom maple? It is uncommon, yet it flourishes close to water. The foliage transforms into a deep crimson hue as autumn arrives." Valora combined herbs with beeswax. "Are there red maples located close to your home? Maybe the path you tread each day?" Margaret inhaled sharply. "My sanctuary of nature. Last spring we planted ornamental maples. For 3 days, the thorns lingered in Mason and Valora's cabin as Margaret's skin gradually healed under Valora's care. Dr. Thorne dedicated countless hours in the clinic, posing inquiries and jotting down observations, as his initial doubts slowly transformed into a deep professional admiration. "You might want to practice in the city," he suggested to Valora on their last evening together. "With your understanding of herbal treatments alongside contemporary medical expertise, you have the potential to assist a greater number of individuals." Valora surveyed the modest cabin that had transformed into her refuge. "This is my place. Dr. Thorne proposed that I might send a medical student to learn from you, someone who could absorb your techniques and bring that knowledge back to enhance the care of our hospital patients." The concept began to blossom during the winter months. In the spring, a young medical student named Edward came, brimming with knowledge from the city, yet modest enough to appreciate Valora's insights. He was pursued by one, then another. The clinic grew once more to welcome the students and the increasing influx of patients who journeyed for days to receive Valora's care. Mason remarked one evening, as they observed their newest apprentice cataloging plant specimens, that something remarkable had been created. From outcast to mentor, Valora rested against him. "Together, we created it." Their tranquil lives encountered a formidable challenge as an illness ravaged the area, an insidious fever that descended unexpectedly. For weeks, Valora hardly found rest, dedicating herself to her students as they worked tirelessly to care for the afflicted. As Mason succumbed to illness, a wave of dread washed over her. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered, gently cooling his fevered brow. "Not after all we've endured." For a week, Mason lingered on the brink of existence. On the 8th morning, the fever finally subsided. Valora, utterly spent, fell beside his bed, overwhelmed with gratitude and tears. With the decline of the epidemic, correspondence began to flow in from Belwick. The town faced a devastating blow, resulting in numerous fatalities. Their request for assistance was sincere and straightforward. "Are you planning to go?" Edward inquired when Valora presented the letter to him. "Indeed," she replied with a straightforwardness, yet not in solitude. The voyage to Belwick resembled a passage through the annals of history. The town appeared diminished from her recollections, the church steeple lacking its former grandeur. As the wagon trundled along the main street, curious faces emerged in the windows, some recognizable, others unfamiliar. Their temporary clinic was established in the town hall, the very place where Valora had once faced her trial. She recognized the irony, yet there was no room for resentment. The ailing required compassion, not resentment. Among the initial patients was Silas Pruitt, recently freed from prison and now emaciated with fever. His eyes grew large with understanding as Valora neared his bedside. "You," he rasped, "have you come to witness my end?" "I've come to try to prevent it," Valora replied, her voice unwavering as she scrutinized him. Later, while she was preparing medicine for him, Mason discovered her by herself. "You are not obligated to show him kindness." "I understand." Valora was meticulous with her herbs, "yet I deserve tranquility." When they departed from Belwick 2 weeks later, The majority of patients were on the mend. As Valora stood before the town council, she observed a mix of new faces and those that stirred memories. She gracefully declined their formal expressions of gratitude. "Rather than expressing gratitude, I seek transformation," she stated with clarity. "Set up a lasting clinic in this location. Edward, who was once my student, is ready to continue as your town healer. Back his efforts, and maybe next time, you won't let fear dictate your choices." Returning home, as summer gracefully transitioned into early fall, Valora and Mason found themselves in the meadow where they had prepared the land for a new structure, more spacious than their cabin, providing ample space for the two of them along with the family they envisioned building together. "Are you certain you wish to remain here?" Mason inquired, his arm encircling her waist. "Imagine residing in a magnificent home in the heart of the city, surrounded by the admiration of esteemed doctors singing your accolades." Valora shook her head, observing the sunset brush the sky with hues of hope. "They abandoned me to suffer in the cold of winter," she murmured gently. "Yet here I discovered sustenance for my spirit." Mason pivoted her to meet his gaze, his seasoned hands tenderly resting on her shoulders. "Valora Finch Blackwood," he uttered, invoking the name she had embraced when they wed in the spring. "When I discovered you, you were barely clinging to life, weakened by the biting cold and gnawing hunger." At that moment, his smile brought delightful creases to the corners of his eyes. "Now you nourish everyone who arrives at your doorstep, with sustenance, with care, with optimism." Valora reached up to kiss him as the first star twinkled into existence above the pines.
That's not sorcery.
She murmured against his lips. "That's simply affection." It was sufficient, more than sufficient, to carry them through all the seasons ahead.